Dario Robleto was born in San Antonio, Texas in 1972 and received his BFA from the University of Texas at San Antonio in 1997. He lives and works in Houston. He's been exhibiting his work extensively since 1997 at museums such as the Whitney Museum of American Art at Altria, New York, the Museum of Contemporary Art, San Diego, the Museum of Contemporary Art in Denver, and the Aldrich Contemporary Arts Museum in Ridgefield, Connecticut. In 2008, a 10-year survey exhibition of his work called Alloy of Love was organized by the Francis Young Tang Teaching Museum and Art Gallery at Skidmore College, Saratoga Springs, New York. Notable group shows include the Whitney Biennial of 2004, the Whitney Museum of American Art in New York, and the exhibition The Old Weird America at the Contemporary Arts Museum in Houston. Dario has been a visiting artist and lecturer at many colleges and universities, including Bard College at Annandale-on-Hudson, New York, MIT in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and the Rhode Island School of Design in Providence. In 2009, his work was featured on the cover of Yo La Tengo's album Popular Songs. His awards have included the International Association of Art Critics Awards in 2004 for the Best Exhibition in a Commercial Gallery at the national level, and recipient of both the 2007 Joan Mitchell Foundation Grant and the 2009 USA Rasmussen Fellowship. In 2011, he was here on a Smithsonian Artist Research Fellowship, mining the collections for future projects. Recent exhibitions include Survival Does Not Lie in the Heavens at the Des Moines Art Center in Iowa and The Pre-Lives of the Blues at the New Orleans Museum of Art. The body of work that most intrigued me is titled An Instinct Towards Life and examines the issues of artworks you deal with that deal with trauma and loss, but also the endurance of the American spirit. These mixed media installation sculptures centered around artifacts relating to the Civil War, to veterans and their families. His approach wove together objects such as mini balls and skeletal pieces, prosthetic legs and glass eyes, widow's ribbons and photographs, and he created extended medium lines for these mixed media sculptural tableaux that formed a narrative thread that bound together the elements of those sculptures and became an integral voice through which to encounter each work. The works in this series embraced memory and memorials, damaged bodies and souls. They form a meditation on death and survival, timeless issues relating to the human condition. Will you please give a warm welcome to Dario Robleto?
Well, thank you for having me. I'm really thrilled to be here and talk about this subject and to be with my fellow artists who I respect so much, and it's really an honor to be speaking before or after them. I'm very happy to be here. So what I wanted to share with you just a little bit on the background of how I became invested in this topic. And part of our goal today here is to argue why does this still matter 150 years later to us as artists, but also as citizens. And for me, my particular history with this narrative begins with 9/11. And as an artist, I was just sort of getting off the ground September 11th, 2001. I had produced several bodies of work at that point, but as with most of us, when that happened, everything changed. And for me as an artist, it was the first time I was confronted with some really serious questions about the limits of art, what you can expect from art in moments like this. So I had a serious reevaluation, put everything back on the table, and decided to start over. I needed to know for myself as an artist some serious things like what is the role of art in a time of war? What is the role should an artist be engaged with a war as long as that war is occurring. Of course, at the time, I had no idea we'd be entering 10 years of war with this particular one. But it became a moral question, like what was the obligation of the artist and art in these moments? So these are, of course, age-old questions, but I've also now realized that every generation has to take them on again and reevaluate them in the context of our time. And this is my small attempt to try to maintain that tradition. And you may even remember after 9/11, one of the big things that struck me was, of course, everybody was asking why, which seemed a very obvious question to ask, but you may remember too, there was quite a pushback to that question in the sense that how dare we allow the other side to have any rational behavior in attacking us. So it sort of shocked me that the conversation couldn't even continue in those early days because it was an insult to even ask why. And I remember being struck by that and immediately wanting to push against it. And many of these works have blossomed from that. So I knew that if I had any chance at addressing these questions for myself, I would have to engage with how other artists and citizens, everyday people, have historically dealt with the ramifications of war. And of course, there are very few historical moments or events as traumatic as the Civil War, and the ripple out effects, as I think all the artists talking today are showing, they're still here. We're still grappling with them. But the more I dug into the absurdities and the horrors, of course, that you have to grapple with when you're looking at war historically, something became more apparent to me, that my interest was not so much in asking how can art supply any coherent answer about why war occurs. I started to realize that there were 2 points that I was kept going back to. And one of them was the type of what can really only be called an existential loneliness that every war, every culture, the soldiers who return home always report that there's this almost unbridgeable gulf between what they experienced and how in the world to convey that to the public, their own family, let alone the larger public. And I've really spent a lot of time thinking about this as this gulf, this unbridgeable gulf of explanation, that the struggle between the home front and the front line. And this was something I realized occurs, of course, every war. And I'm going to dig into that point a little more in just a second. But the other thing that was crucial in my thinking at the time was I was moved deeply how also historically across time and culture something keeps happening. These are common denominators. And it was the everyday people's responses to dealing with the trauma of war, this back on the home front side, and the incredible creativity, you could argue, a sense of invention that people have been forced to come up with when dealing with these types of losses. So I quickly started to realize that there was an alternate history of creativity and invention that was completely provoked by war, and that in general is not discussed in larger strains of art history or the history of invention or creativity. And I think that's overlooking a really remarkable, very human aspect of how do you use creativity as a form of survival in the face of these types of losses. I've even, over the years, come to think about it, the term I like to use is there's a logic of loss, that if you could put on the table almost everything that anyone's ever made in a state of a grief or mourning, there's an amazing similarity in some aesthetic decisions that could not have been transferred across each other because there was no larger art history narrative linking it. So I find this fascinating that humans, one, use creativity to combat loss, but that some things keep reoccurring as far as craft or aesthetic decisions. And of course, the Civil War took this to absolutely a whole new level. So I knew that if I was going to answer any of these questions, even partly to myself, I was going to have to engage with the way others have dealt with war in this creative sense. And often that meant, for me, relearning many of the craft traditions that would make up what would be known as the mourning arts in general. And in many cases, these are forms of knowledge that are going extinct or very close, at the very least, they're dormant in culture because the knowledge has just sort of got cut off or people have not chosen to pick it up. Of course, we live in a very different time where to mourn publicly is frowned upon, especially in any overt way. These things can be viewed as morbid or macabre, and I think that's a real injustice to the original spirit that produced a lot of these mourning arts. So I broke down these two problems into two basic questions for me. How does one bridge the gulf between the home front and the front line? And how does one learn to remain loving in the face of sorrow? Language, I'm not going to focus so much on the role of language in my work, but it is a crucial aspect of how I proceed. So forming just the right questions is a big part of my process that allows me to move forward in my sculptural practice. So after sort of narrowing down these questions, then I could more directly apply, can art do anything about either one of these questions? I don't know. I can't stand up here and say I have a good answer, but I've been trying for 10 years now to try to get to some sensible answer with this, and maybe that's impossible. But the few works I'm going to show you are pulled out of this bigger body of work. And just a few words about the context. I'm just going to share with you three works, but these are three works that are pulled from about over 60 works, a body of work, and this occurred over the past 10 years. It's now manifested in about 5 different shows. And I've gave myself another narrative challenge, which was, could I write a story to help me make these works? And the strategy I came up with was, and this is very loose, but I imagined a wandering American soldier that, what if you could transport him and deposit him in every American battlefield to date, from the Revolutionary War to the most recent? And if you could, in a sense, make this time-traveling soldier, what would happen to him physically, emotionally, psychologically, and then what would the home front be doing to deal with knowing this loved one is in this time-traveling vortex? So this is a writing strategy for me to help. So I wanted to just lay that out there so you know a little bit where these objects are coming from, because many of them are pulled from that larger narrative I wrote. The first piece I wanted to share with you is called A Defeated Soldier Wishes to Walk His Daughter Down the Wedding Aisle. And so in my research, original source letters were a crucial aspect to forming all of these sculptures. And of course, I'm always looking for these things that are kind of lost or not given the spotlight I feel the larger narrative could encompass. And one of them, as I'm sure many of you know, the Civil War amputation levels reached an unprecedented high. So not only do we have to account for the death tolls, which are staggering, you also have to account for a whole generation of men who are coming home incomplete in very crucial ways. But of course, at the time, the government had no infrastructure to respond in any meaningful way to these men who had suddenly lost limbs. There was no one assumed the government would supply a prosthetic limb, for example. So I was so struck over and over finding letters where men reflected or mentioned in passing the need to take this into their own hands, which meant carving their own leg from scratch. And you have to, this is one of those moments where only war can present moments like this, where as a person living today, it's really hard. It's that gulf again. How do you get in that mind state to imagine to take it upon yourself to carve your own leg. And in this case, the desire to carve that leg was provoked by a simple gesture that most of us would not think required such an endeavor, wanting to walk his daughter down a wedding aisle. So this object that you're looking at is sort of an early attempt about, can I help a gesture that had begun, in this case, 150 years ago? Could art, or me as the artist, in some baton-like passing of a creative act, could I take it and help finish something that never got finished, or add on whatever knowledge I could bring to that endeavor to help him? So this what you're looking at here, this piece of wood here, this is a cast of an actual leg, a Civil War soldier carved for himself out of a stump of wood, and inside the boot there's this very primitive iron foot that, it's very primitive. It's just really to keep a balance. But what I've done here is I wanted the form of the original gesture, because every mark he made into this, I felt, was incredibly loaded with meaning. But the object that you're looking at here is actually made of melted vinyl records. And without going so into my other passion and background of music and DJ culture, I hope this will make sense unrelated to that context, but just to say that music, also my knowledge of music and DJ culture interlapped with these war works in I think in interesting ways. And everybody can understand the role of music, getting you from A to B. It's been a crutch for many people, and I was taking this in a more literal way. What if you had to carve your leg from your favorite love song, or different types of songs? I won't go over the whole material list, and Eleanor hinted at this, but these texts are crucial to my work. I spend a great deal of time writing them, and these come before the object. I always write these before I ever know what I'm going to do, so they kind of help me get to making something. But just to back up, I'll come back to that in a second. But so inside is this Civil War soldier's cast, and then I proceeded to imagine, what if I could help him rebuild himself as he's slowly trudging through time? So at each step of the way, I add on another war. So the boots themselves are World War I cavalry boots, also made of melted vinyl record. Everything you're looking at is made of melted vinyl. The boot irons, the boot nails, the laces, each are from succeeding wars up to the Korean War, that he's slowly adding a piece of himself as time's passing to try to accomplish this goal of walking down the wedding aisle. And the other crucial element in this piece is the substance that he's trudging through here. And this is a substance called ballistic gelatin. And it has one use. It's a very, very loaded material in the world. Basically, the military or police forces, when you cook this gelatin up, it mimics human flesh so accurately that they use this to test their latest firearm technology on. So it has one purpose, which is to judge the success of a bullet in a body. And success is, of course, dependent on how much damage it causes. So if you can imagine this stuff, it's cooked up in these huge vats, and people, the experimenters will shoot straight into it, and then they can measure all the damage as it moves through. So in many of these works, I wanted to use the materials of war, or the materials that helped us get better at war, in this case, the ballistic gelatin, and I wanted to completely upend their original use and find another solution for what they could be used for. And in this case, imagining a very different type of mark making through that gelatin with a totally different intention of getting to A to B. And just the two songs, for example, are the Shirelles Soldier Boy and Skeeter Davis's The End of the World. If you know those songs, I always like ask people to play them in your head right now as a little form of personal DJing. Here's another image of them. So they look like they've been through 200 years of warfare. So the three works I'm showing you also form a smaller little narrative amongst that bigger narrative, which is why I chose them today. So the next piece I want to share with you is called The Century of November. And so this is me sort of meditating on that daughter herself, that all that effort was extended for. And it also overlapped with another problem I kept coming up against in my research, which was, how does the human mind understand such abstract numbers of death tolls of any given war? The current estimate, Civil War, 750,000. Then we get to the World War I, whoa, it skyrockets into the tens of millions. And there's just really no way for the human mind to get there. And I think this is part of that gulf problem. How do you bridge such gulfs? And can art do anything about that? So I took this challenge of how do you represent a number that's, the brain is almost not hardwired to even really understand. And the way I tried to solve it was through this. This is based on a child's mourning dress, which would have been, it's accurate in the sense of what a child would have been sort of accustomed to wear in a state of mourning, which I won't go, many of you I'm sure know the history of mourning clothing in Victorian culture. This is drawn off of that. But in those letters, another thing that I kept coming across was how many times soldiers mentioned the intention to start a family when they returned home. In many ways, that was what kept them motivated. And yet, of course, they didn't return home. So the death toll, official death toll numbers we have are one thing, but I've always felt they're not accurate, because how do you add on the number of all the lives that could have been if the soldier had made it home? That takes it to a whole nother level of incomprehensibility. So my idea was, could I take these letters that are filled with the intention of future life and remix them in some way that tried to account for that abstract number? So this dress is made of those letters. Here's some of the material list. The pattern design that you see on there is the ink from the letters that had been removed and reconstituted into a new ink so that I could re-dye the pattern on the paper. So no material was lost. In a way, the material was reshuffled to produce this new object. And the whole point of the the absent body here was, could she mourn her own non-existence, which is kind of a very abstract way of thinking about it. But the body's gone, but the dress that mourns her potential for life is what I imagined her wearing if she had been born. And here, this is an example of some of the craft traditions that I had to relearn that would have been common in the era. All forms of knowledge, like I said, are going extinct. And then the last piece I'd like to share with you, really thinking about this idea of absence. And after hearing now Sally's talk, I'm so happy I chose this piece as a, using music analogy again here, an A side and a B side, that her work is so evocative in producing images or what was there, in a sense. And in some ways, my work is trying to pull an object that maybe would have been in that image out. At least that was crossing my mind as I was watching her work. And also her interest in and all of our interest in the battlefields. And I think all of us have to grapple with the physicality, the materiality of war, which, if you're going to talk about war, you cannot overlook. It's just, it's a fact. And I was taken with all the battlefield imagery that I saw, and also building off of what Sally said, about the earth swallowing you whole. And nothing, I thought, conveyed that more than the role of the trench in war. And soldiers must have been feeling that they were being swallowed whole. And of course, what happens when all that material merges under our feet is where things get really weird. As each war passes, a new sediment is sort of laid down. And I wanted to try to make a piece that encompassed another abstraction. How do you dig down? What would you find if you dug down there? And I was, last story I'll share with you, I was very moved by another forgotten story. It was in World War I. It was a group of French women who, and I should say World War I, as horrible as the Civil War was, we reached a new level of the success of our weaponry in that someone could literally turn to dust for the first time on a battlefield, which to me is a marker, an historical event that's not as highlighted as I think it should be. Like it's a horrible moment in our history to say, when's the day we could turn someone to dust, where someone just vanished on the battlefield. And of course, this played complete havoc with all kinds of mourning customs, especially Catholic customs who needed something to bury. They needed a thing. And in World War I, this group of women were this country was being shocked, of course, by nothing returning home, and petitioned the French government to please send some soldiers out there to bring something back. They didn't care what it was, a fragment of a uniform, anything. And when they didn't move fast enough, these women took it upon themselves to go out in groups and rummage through this material, looking for something. But what they could not have predicted is that the devastation was so complete that if, for example, if they were to find a wedding band, there was no longer any way to know whose wedding band it was. So this really had a profound effect on communal notions of mourning, and that every ring had to be everybody's symbol or thing that they could focus their mourning on. I've never been able to find any documentation of what in the world, because they had to have taken something out into the field with them. What did that look like? And what, after they had accumulated things, what would that have looked like? I've never been able to find that. So this is my attempt at imagining, based on a historical fact, what this could have possibly been. So what you're looking at here, these are men's wedding ring finger bones coated in melted bullet lead from various American wars. Men's wedding bands excavated from different battlefields. The basket itself this is all made from shrapnel and bullet lead excavated. The basket itself. This is fabric from mourning clothing. And there's this wax-dipped bridal bouquet from many different decades, a flower from several different decades, that I'm imagining these very odd merger of man and earth that's occurring under our feet, of the bones of one generation slowly being compressed and coated with the lead of a war afterwards. And this compression is occurring over and over, of course, through our history. And here's just a final example of some of the hair flowers that I've decorated it with. So I'll end there, and I look forward to our questions later if you have any. Thank you.